So good morning, everyone. The ones I'm seeing on the screen and the ones behind the screen. I hope you're all doing well. And before I dive into today's presentation, let me introduce myself. My name is Robert Ganzamhore. I work for Share Screen Africa, and I'm very, very excited to be a host this morning. Now, I am the warm-up to the main act that Marc is about to deliver. And you should think of me as a trailer before the blockbuster. Now,
Uyeka.
let's go through the key learning outcomes. So now Mark is going to tell us about voice for nature, and that's the main topic of the presentation. And the key learning outcomes are that after the presentation, we'll have learned that we should have one central idea, exactly one. And it's better to have one point unless the other point serves your central idea. You don't have to say it. We also learn that compelling speeches answer a worthwhile question. The answer itself is a takeaway. And finally, we will also learn that we have to use a plain, educated language to connect with the audience, in only 10 seconds.
So I hope you can see what I can see.
Perfect.
It's really a great pleasure to be talking to you. Ooh, what happened here? I didn't want that, did I? Here we go. So it's really a great pleasure today to do this and with you and to talk to you about how speeches actually work, how presentations work. And I would even argue that sometimes you can use that to write your essays as well in the structure. And I've done a similar workshop before in a larger group. This is really cool that we're a small group, so I want to make it as interactive as possible. And if you have a question, please signal Cheryl and we can do a quick stop and then maybe go into depth. Now, the fundamental question what we ask is why, how does it actually work? How do speeches work? And the answer is they answer questions. And I'd like you to think about every speech you do as an attempt to answer a question. And the starting point is that you need to know what the question is. What is that one thing you want to talk about? Now, if I got my question right, you already know, which is that I will prove to you that using questions is magic and it helps you to create your speeches, to create your presentations, to stay on track, to remember your speeches, and to also check what you're saying. And I cannot overemphasize how important it is to stick to one idea only, one central idea, one proposition. The proposition, the idea, the thought that explains why you're speaking, and that may also be the basis of the persuasion, because at the end of the day, when I talk to you today, I want to convince you of something. When you are going to go out, educate, you want to inform, but probably you also have a mission. You want to convince your audience, your students, anybody who's listening to have a takeaway that will result in them doing something. So you want to touch their head, their heart, and their hand. The three H's: head, heart, hand. Know, understand, and feel, and then act. This is what we do speeches for. And if I didn't want you to do something at the end of this, I wouldn't be doing this. So remember, what was this all about? It was about me trying to convince you that at the end, a good speech answers a question. And what's the question today? How does a good speech work? Now, there are a few things you could keep in mind. And the last time I used 4 slides, this time I only use 1. There's a little idea here is to minimize the number of words that are on a slide. Don't count them, but if it's more than 25, maybe there is too much text on the slide. And you need to think about the setting. So I know now you're in an office kind of setting, you're in a small room, you're all sitting together, you're watching me, you're also watching Cheryl, I suppose, and you know this is going to be a kind of workshop on speeches. You've introduced yourself. I've got a little bit of an idea who you are. Your students shall explain this, who do this as an elective. I know that you're in an academic setting, so I can have plain educated language, which we also works. And I know that we need to be done by 9:50 because you need to go to your next class. And I know what the program is. So before you begin, make sure you have the salt that you need to do your presentation. The setting, the audience, the language you want to use, and how much time you have. So little acronym, SALT: setting, audience, language, and how much time. Now, we often think about, I need to remember what I wanted to say. But if you compare a slightly formal presentation like the one I'm doing right now and a casual conversation, one of the big differences is that in a formal presentation, we only say what is necessary. We avoid filler words, we avoid unnecessary extensions of our ideas. We stick to exactly what we wanted to say. And to many people I work with, I suggest that when they think about their script, they don't think about it as remembering what they wanted to say, but to actually remember what they didn't want to say and to stick to the course. And as I said earlier, there is nothing more important than to know that you only speak about one idea. And as Robert already suggested in one of the learning outcomes, if you have a joke, a story, something interesting that does not serve your central idea, keep it for another time. If it's a good joke or a good story, it will find its place in the next presentation you do, but not in this one. You move it somewhere else. So only say what truly supports what you do. And use pauses, lots of pauses. Because when you write, you have to keep your audience engaged, the reader. But when you speak, your audience is actually thinking for you. And I could stop speaking in mid-sentence, and you are trying to complete the sentence. And that means that in a presentation, I can be even more economical with my words than if I were writing. So again, one key takeaway is stick to that one idea and don't say more than you absolutely have to. And you'd be surprised how little sometimes is required to get a point across. And silence tells many stories. Now, perhaps you've already worked out that I love questions. And I've already suggested why. because they're kind of magic. They give a direction. They give you the license to speak. If you ask me a question, I'm allowed to answer. If I just make a statement, it isn't clear I'm allowed to continue. But if you ask a question, if I'm answering a question, it is common that I'm allowed to speak. Questions also create a conversation, so they personalize what is happening. So if in your mind you were thinking, how do speeches work? I now have the license to answer. I also use questions because they help me remember what I wanted to say. And even though I just said it's important to remember what we didn't want to say, I do also want to stay on track. And so when I write my speeches or when I prepare something, I don't write subheadings as statements. I reword them as questions. Because as soon as I read a question, I want to answer it. So the next paragraph is then the answer to the question. It's just a little trick I use because they trigger and help remember. And then finally, when we know there is a question, we can double check whether what we say answers the question. It's to keep us honest and to keep us on track as we go through our presentations, as we draft our presentation, as we think about it. So you will see throughout this presentation lots and lots of questions. And I know that Dr. Cheryl Ogilvie has shared with you a template, and unsurprisingly, it had questions on it. Now, there is a basic speech structure, and it's pretty straightforward. It has a title, there's an opening, like an introduction, there's a body, there's a rule of three we often use, and then you conclude. But there is no energy in that structure itself. To create energy, we need to give it a little bit more momentum and dynamic. And we can do that by thinking about what does the audience want to know? What is the audience interested in? And what do I have to say that is worthwhile and helps the audience to know what it wants to know? And the questions that you see here are the same questions that were on the template. What's it about? Why does the speaker care about the topic? Should the audience care? Why is it actually important? And you can see that's a progression from the speaker to the audience and then to the bigger context. What's the takeaway? And then importantly, what can we do? Because if we just inform people and don't give them a sense of agency that they can actually do something, remember the head, the heart, and the hand, then they will probably not consider the presentation you do as that interesting. So you've seen the template, and I know you've prepared something based on this template. But let's try a different story than the one you saw, which was about plastic, just as another little example. So this is about SDG 3, and it's got the funky title of prawn therapy. What is it about? It's about fighting a debilitating disease, which is actually the #2 cause of deaths in Africa after malaria. Schistosomiasis. It's a disease that is carried by snails that live in drinking water, in the waters of the rivers. And why do I care about this? Well, because I have a Senegalese friend whose family was affected after by infections that skyrocketed Because a dam was built that disturbed nature's balance. And because the dam was built, the snails just multiplied. What had happened? The prawns that ate the snails disappeared because of the dam. So what was the solution? Why should it matter to you? Well, because there was actually a very low-cost, eco-friendly idea that empowered the community to not only solve their problem, but also have a source of sustainable protein, a food source. And it illustrates that there is a direct link between ecosystem health, human well-being, and that needs to be incorporated in health strategies. And what is our takeaway? That this particular idea to cultivate prawns, to actually breed prawns that eat the snails and then create pest control in a biological way, also creates a source of proteins and food for the community. So it solves multiple problems. But the starting point was a disturbance in nature's balance. And so what can we do next? Well, we can think about this as a training on sustainable aquaculture, health education, and I know you are all really interested in education for a lasting long-term impact. So it's something that the community can do itself. It doesn't actually need that much help to do this. And they can rebalance nature, they can get rid of the snails, and the disease disappears. And the order of magnitude is incredible. What they achieved was an 80% reduction in the snails and a complete control of the disease. And the community was a lot better off afterwards. So to me, this is one of the nice little success stories of SDG-free, which is about health and well-being, water, and a sustainable environment. And we'll hear more about it. So this is how you can create a quick speech very quickly, and it is just another example. So a quick couple of tips and tricks. First of all, we messed that up today. We didn't do what we just said, what I'm saying here. And the original idea was that Robert was going to give a slightly more expansive introduction. And the point I was going to make is that when you are introduced, that is already part of your presentation. So even before the title of your presentation or your speech is given, the introduction can already be part of what you do. So we often forget when we prepare something to also think about how much of the content we can give to the person who introduces us. It's just a little tip. Use the moderator, use the facilitator, use whoever is introducing you, the host, to do some of the work for you and to perhaps raise the question that you will then subsequently answer. All right, so that's the first little tip here. The second tip is find a way to connect with your audience very quickly. And a personal story works wonders. I could have reminded you that you have to listen to what I'm saying because you will have an exam where you present, and this may make a difference. So it could help you, and then it connects to exactly what you have to say. You can make a startling statement. You can do audience participation, which online is very difficult. What I would not recommend is to start with a joke, because if you don't know your audience yet, it might fall flat. And if the joke doesn't quite work, that's the end of your presentation. No one's going to pay attention anymore. So if you have one joke and you absolutely have to tell it, keep it to the end. When you finish, I've already mentioned this, pay attention that you only have one conclusion. So you have one proposition and you have a conclusion that ties back to the proposition. One ending only. Do not extend the ending because you've got more ideas that come into your mind. The other important thing is why we need takeaways or a what next comment at the end is audiences want to be able to look into the future from what our presentation. So you should expect me to end with something that helps you walk forward to something that happens after I stop speaking. So one end only and keep it moving. There is a magic of PrEP. PrEP stands for proposition, reason, example, proposition. It's the shortest possible speech you can give. And it means when you ask something, a question, when you make a point, you summarize it in saying exactly where you stand. We want people to stop littering nappies because this will improve the water or will reduce food insecurity. That is a proposition, it's an opinion. It's important that it's not just a statement, it's your view of the world. And people in the room can imagine that somebody may have a different perspective. And because there is a different perspective, it becomes interesting because there's tension. So if I say it's raining outside, that doesn't help us. If I say it's raining and that will help, now I've got an opinion. And you may say, no, I hate this because I want to go out and I don't want to get wet. So we have a difference of opinion and you're not curious about what I want to say. The second thing is really important is to explain why we have this opinion. And there's a magic word, it's called because. I believe this because. And then you give your example and then you conclude. And so as a result of that, this is why the fact that it rains outside is beneficial, for example. Or if we stop littering, we will have clean water. Or that urban gardening, sustainable gardening will reduce food insecurity and will improve education. Or if we want better education, one way to begin the conversation is to focus on food security. So there's various ways to come back to the conclusion. You can also create an entire, actually, let's go. Now, we talked about stories, and stories all have the same rough arrangement. They begin in a situation that exists, and we had good examples today. Then a problem occurs, and then you work your way back to an outcome that is a little bit better than where you started off. If it's less, it's not interesting. If it's too much, no one will believe it. So you start somewhere, when things get worse, you find a solution and you come back again. And the best stories are actually the ones where the path that goes from the bottom back up isn't a straight line, but it's wobbly because there are little setbacks and then there's solutions and there's a setback and there's another solution and it's a step. And if you look at books you read and stories you like, and if you watch movies, they all function the same way. So keep this structure in mind. You start off in a normal world, there's a change, there's a problem, and you solve. Remember, originally, there are people living in Senegal, they're suffering from a disease. That's normal life. It's not easy, but it's okay. Then the dam is built. Now they have a real problem. The snail population explodes, infections explode, and they need to find a solution. And they work their way back. And now the disease isn't completely gone, but they've gotten rid of 80% of the snails and they're back in a normal territory and a little bit better because they now also have a protein source because they're cultivating the prawns deliberately rather than haphazardly. right? So that story follows this curve exactly. And you can use the questions or the prompts that I've shared with you, the template, to create the story in a simple way by just following these little cues. Once upon a time, which is where you talk about who. And we had that today. Who? Me living in Gauteng. My friend who went to school there. And every day we also had that example. And then something changed and things got worse. And because of that, something happened. Because of that, something else happened. And then something else happened until finally there was a solution. And ever since, and that is the ending that points into the future. Now, in a formal presentation, you wouldn't say once upon a time, but it is in your mind. That is how you tell the story. And you can just use this to very simply outline it. And you can actually literally create an entire story in a few sentences. So I've tried to reword it before, and just read it for yourself. It's the story that follows. And obviously, if you want to make it really interesting and you have a little bit more time, there will be setbacks. They tried to breed the prawns, it didn't work. They changed something, then it did work. And that's how the story progresses. There's tension and contrast. And you can also use the same type of approach with questions and format, and also this curve to if you want to convince people and you want to talk about the benefits they have. What's on offer? What's in it for the audience? What's effort of doing things? What happens if they don't do it? And why should they do it now? And you can just tick through these boxes and you will have a few sentences and you already have a compelling pitch. And then once you have that as an outline, you can then work on creating detail and adding character and volume. Or persuasion. You have a problem, you focus on the needs it affects. We have litter in the river. What need does it affect? Basic need for clean water and food. And more detail, you give an example, you talk about how people are not maybe there are no bins that they can use. You give a couple of examples. And then you talk about how, and you stick to highlighting the problem. So the story we heard about the litter was good because it went deeper. Also, the story about the setting in the urban setting went deeper in several layers. That was very good. And at the end, always, what's next? Because if you don't tell people what is next, you leave them hanging, and no one likes that. And that's it. One ending. That's it. Now, we always have at the end of what's it, there is the question. And I want to thank you. Robert is going to say the final words for today because he's had to listen to this many times. Thank you so much for bearing with us and listening in and paying attention and participating in particular. Thank you for sharing the stories that you had to share. I learned something about you. That's really helpful. It's really interesting. Thank you so much for that. And I wish you good luck and bon courage for anything that comes in your future and for your exams and everything you have to do in your course. So thank you so much to you. And Robert, the stage is yours to close this all off.
And then Felicia would like to say something as well. Marc?
Before Robert closes us, we would really like to say thank you on behalf of the class of Conservation Communication from TUT. We really appreciate the time that you took to actually even do the presentation, sit down and design it. It really means a lot and we are grateful. I believe everyone here will take a lot from this presentation and we will apply it going forward. And I think it's gonna be a positive outcome for us. And if I may ask, what is bonjour? Bonjour.
Bon courage is French and means good courage. It basically means you
Courage.
don't need luck because you can make your own luck by being courageous. And
Well, bon courage to everyone who's in this
bon
presentation.
courage, exactly.
Yeah.
No, thank you very, very much. And with everything you've said, I'm sure that from now on it's only 90%. And now, Robert.
All right, I only have to say thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope you're now walking away from this session feeling a bit more confident and a lot less panicked when it comes to what you have to say and how to say it. If there's one key takeaway I got from Marc ever since we started talking, is that structure is your friend and stories are paramount. First of all, we learned that you have to have one central idea, exactly one. You have to have one central idea, and unless the other point serves as serve your central idea, you don't have to say it. And compelling speeches answer a worthwhile question. The answer is the takeaway. And then you have to use plain, educated language and connect with your audience in just 10 seconds. Yes, that's it. As of
Yeah, if I
now,
can just also say thank you. Marc, I know how much prep work went into this, big time. It was a lot of work for you, and I'm telling you, I thoroughly enjoyed this morning session. Made a huge difference in my advanced students. Thank you to CL, thank you to Robert, Sela, thank you. And also to the team that had to run and go and attend meetings in Stellenbosch. But thank you, everyone.